Okay, so I'll just try and keep it like as light as possible and chatty as possible, okay? So I haven't taught this in this way before, and I'm trying to find a simple way to talk about this subject to unificationists. Because it's such a complex topic. And you know, you can tell there's kind of a war going on, you know, in schools. There's a lot of parents who don't like what is being taught to their children. And a lot of people there's a lot of tension around this whole issues of sexuality and gender and everything else. And there's, you know, massive protest in France, you know, and which the British do, but the French seem to eat for breakfast, you know, it's their kind of kimchi and rice, you know. Let's go and protest about something. And there's massive tension in America. There's this between, on the one side, the Democrats who have fully kind of embraced everything on that dimension, and then Trump hasn't said too much, but behind him there's lots of people who are really fighting it and trying to, who say there's something really going on here which isn't healthy at all for our nations. And some people, you know, so it's evident that some people say, well, this is like, you know, this is human rights and this kind of thing. And there's some people who can see, can look and see, and what they see is damage. They see damage. And those people who talk about human rights, they don't see damage. They just see the human right. They see equality, fairness, these kind of things. And then there's the people on the other side who said, no, look, this is just going to make our societies less sustainable. It's going to damage our communities. There's more children going to get hurt, and our national debts will go even crazier. And so some people can see the damage. Some people see the demand for fairness and this kind of equality and tolerance. And this is a challenge, because if you don't see the damage, you don't see it. And if if you're fully involved in, and this is a real problem, because those who see the damage are now told, oh, we can see a lot of damage. In fact, I'm getting hurt here because of these laws. They now are told that they can't say that they're being hurt because they are hurting these other adults, you know. But they're not trying to hurt these adults. They're saying these laws are causing us to experience, or our children to experience, worse outcomes. And we don't like that law, which you can't pass a law which makes our children or our communities have worse outcomes. And so there's people who see the damage, and there's people who can't see the damage. But to say I see the damage and it hurting me and my family is now to be said, well, you're hurting these people over here. And that's complicated. Yeah? So I'm trying to find a simple way to explain what's happening based upon the three blessings. What this battle is really about. And I don't know if I've done a good job, so I apologize this evening. Yeah?
Sorry, I might have missed this thing, but when you say that people will see the damage,
yeah,
and there's people who want fairness and equality,
yeah.
What is this damage?
Well, we're going to go through that, yeah? All right. But I'm trying to give a context, yeah? I'm trying to explain why there seems to be so tension. There's so much tension. And there's tension because if it wasn't damaging me, I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't say anything, you know, go on, go ahead. And in fact, a few years ago, I was completely on one side and saying, well, it's okay, go ahead. But as I looked into it, I started to see the damage. But it took me a long time to see the damage. And then I started to understand those who opposed, because I said, oh my gosh, there's a lot of damage there. And I never saw that before. But it took me a long time to see the damage. It took a long time for me to train my brain to see it. Until I came to the point of saying, that damage is far worse. It's going to hurt, in other words, it's going to cause decay for our society, not improvement. And I came to, oh, that's what's happening. That's why there's some people who are against this, and I hadn't seen that before. But there's obviously people who are against, and people who don't see the damage, and there's people who do. Problem. Okay? So, from my understanding of what the actual principle says, yeah, it says the biblical, is that human development happens through the child. Through lineage development. As unificationists, we look at our children and we say, hopefully they're a little bit better, than I am. They're a little bit more intelligent. They have better morals and values than I had when I was their age. They are more emotionally stable, maybe. They have better relationship skills. And because because based upon the fact that I tried to love my wife and we tried to give to the children, and then my parents, does it work on that? No, it doesn't. Does it? Doesn't work on TV. So my parents tried to invest something, my extended family, my community, my church community tried to invest something into the children. The education system tried, the political system tried, and the media and charity, everybody got involved, and somehow, hopefully, based upon all that, the child is better, or more of a manifestation of God's love and goodness and cleverness and relationship. So that when they go out into the world, they make a better world because they're a better human being, better at being human. So we talk about 3 generations, this is the 3 generations, it will improve and the world will become better because of these wonderful children. And I look at the second gen and I get so many of those so much better than their parents. So, I barely scraped through university. I just got through it, and I struggle with my A-levels, and I look at my kids, firsts, and, I go, well, and they are better core values than I had, and they have, they et cetera, and they're just better people than I was at their age. And I have a hope that they go on and generate, their children will be better than them, and that's the pride you get. Yeah? I think William and Clive will agree that seeing your children have done okay, are doing okay, and getting into life, and it's like, oh, I've done my job. I did my job reasonably well, and my community helped me, So throughout Christian history, we hope that each child becomes a bit better, and we overcame slavery, and we overcame women's rights, and we overcame all these things which blocked us from being more of a temple of God, and we step by step became more manifestation of God's child, and God's love could come into our communities. Yeah. So the interest is in the child. Because that's the future, that's the generation, that's the 5 primary interests. And the interest should be is how do we make our children more wholesome and better? That's the heart of the unificationist, from what I understand. Yeah. And the section on give and take action before the 3 blessings, it talks about the interaction between this men and women. It talks about this subject and object relationship or whatever it is. And when it's centered on God, it generates a force. And so because the husband and wife relationship is centered upon what the plan of creation is, through the child, the culture continues to exist. A culture which took generations to build continues to exist. The good in that culture will hopefully be maintained, and hopefully there's new development. You will take it to a new level, like you will look after the planet better than we did, for example. Yeah, So the hope is that you take what you say. Okay, we're still alive. We're still going as a culture. We've got some good things going, and how do we improve on it? Because we're better human beings than our parents were. We can look after the world better. And so we look at all the cultures around the world that existed up until recently, and they were all marriage family cultures. They were all marriage, whether polygamous or monogamous. They all were marriage family culture because it's centered on God. it generated the forces to keep the culture going. The culture could survive despite wars, despite famines, despite all kinds of things. And the marital family structure allowed God's blessings to continue to flow across the generations. So the British culture took generations to develop. Yeah? We were kind of left alone for hundreds of years, and we took time to develop. It took each child becoming a bit more clever or a bit more wealthier, or, you know. And slowly we built St. Paul's and London and learned to build cars, and, you know, it became more manifest. But it took generations. This is a very slow thing, yeah. But hopefully the child becomes more intelligent, better relationship skills, less traumatized. And when I really, really got into the data, I said, well, what's the root cause of this? For me, what's the really root cause of this? What is the root cause of this stability? What is it? The stableness which allows this to happen? The psychology of the child is fulfilled in knowing that the two people who created them love them. This is the central core. We talk about the parent-child relationship or the parents-child relationship being the central core of you know, the kind of universe. And it is this: the child is born wanting to know that the father and mother, the biological father and mother, love them. They're born. They want to know that, and we can't escape that reality. And that's so fundamental to being God's children, to know that you're loved by the two people. And we know this in all kinds of ways because of the research into children who lost their father, you know, through divorce, and the pain they suffer, or the children who are born through IVF, and many of them go around trying to find who their father was, you know, things like this. And they still want to know, you know, am I connected to this person who created me? And so for me, finally I get, oh, this is what it is. What happens is if this gets broken in any way, the child experiences we call it attachment trauma. It's an attachment trauma, and when that has an attachment trauma happen, then all kinds of risks enter the child's life. It's a more likely to do all kinds of things to try and get that love, which it didn't get from its mother or father. It will do all kinds of things, and most of them are damaging, you know. And so once this is broken, fractured, then the vertical trust and the love often get broken. They're less trusting. Yeah.
Is it broken if it's non-biological parents?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's already broken there. Yeah. So the data on adopted children is almost the same as children of divorce and children. In other words, they have higher risks of all kind of negative things. Yeah. It doesn't mean all of them. It just means a higher risk. Yeah. Okay. So it is this fracturing of this heart of the child that is the stability. It depends. So that's why polygamous relationships can sustain cultures, because the child still knows both its mother and father. Yeah. It still knows both its biological mother and father, even in polygamy. Yeah. So for me, this is when I look at all the data, you know, because I've looked on divorce and adoption and single parenting and everything else. Because what, you know, for example, you would say, a lot of people say, well, of course the single child of a single mother does worse because he doesn't have the financial resources. Yeah, and doesn't have the father, maybe there. So ideally, when she finds a husband, the child should, with the financial resources and the extra parent and the time, the child should almost come back to being having the same lower risks as a child by both parents. But we don't see that. We don't see that. We see that a lot of children don't recover. In fact, they get worse because they realize that their mother's never going to remarry their biological father. And that makes it really angry at their mother and angry at the the man that got in the way of the remarriage. So we see that the child is, how the psychology of the child is highly tuned to wanting to know that its mother and father love each other and want to. And I felt that even at my age, when one day, a few years ago, when my father was still alive, and he said something like, you know, almost like, "You're not my son," you know. And I was so deeply, it really hurt. You know, I couldn't believe it. And I had to go and talk to my mum and tell her, "Mum, I'm really suffering here. Even at my age, 60, I'm saying he doesn't love me, you know, he hates my guts or something." She went to talk to him. "No, you misunderstood him," you know, etc. But it was very painful. And I couldn't believe how painful it was. So I can imagine what it's like. I can't imagine what it's like to not have a, you know, even though my father was in many ways kind of not really all there some ways, but he's still my father. And that's really important to me. And he gave me many good things, which is really important, and I honor that. So this, I found out, this is it. This is the core. And once you break that, then you end up with children who start to act in ways, more likely to act in ways which fundamentally cause the culture to decay. And so I came to the conclusion that fundamentally there's only one form of, you know, family structure, which is the post-biological, which can sustain a culture, which can develop a culture, because the psychology of the child has to be fulfilled. And if it's not fulfilled, then it's more likely to take drugs or get into crime or all kinds of other problems. And we see that all around us today. So I came to the conclusion, so the principle is right. It draws these three pictures. It says this has to be a mind and body and the three blessings, and then there's one family which God created, one type of family, which allows it to generate the forces for the continuation of a culture and existence of a culture. And it's just one family there. It's not other kinds of family, it's just one kind of family. You know, why is it only one kind of family? And you go, oh. And finally I came down to, that's what it is, it's the child. It's the child. We can't do anything about the child's psychology. There's nothing we can do about it. We can't change it, you know. So, you know, if Yasmin, if your father said to you, I don't like you anymore, go away, how would you feel? Would you say, okay, no, it's fine, Dad? Or you would feel devastated? Which one? Yeah, devastated. Yeah, to know that the person who created you doesn't love you. It's devastating. And it's really, really, and it's really problematic, and we can't escape this. And that's the problem. That's where we're designed. So when we get into this world of the cultural war, the state makes a legal right for some group of adults, other people have to get hurt. Somebody else gets hurt. When the state gets involved in the sexual issues, any of these sexual issues, and says, I will give you a right, then some other group of adults have to get hurt. And the way it works, it's worked over the last 50 years, is the child. Because the child can't complain. Yeah, so, and only adults can speak for the children, but then the state says, well, why are you being so nasty to those adults? But it's not that. You're trying to protect the children. So whenever the state creates a legal right for some kind of adults, the children, you have to see who gets hurt by that, and it's always the children. It's always the children. So we can take one of the very first laws, and it's not the first law, but which embodied the sexual culture war is a process whereby the well-being of the child over here, which is the focal point of history, it's like, how do I improve this child so human history can develop, is sacrificed in different ways for the adult desires and happiness. In other words, the state says the adult happiness is more important than child well-being. Adult desires are more important than child well-being. So the energy, the state proclaims mother's desires are more important than the child well-being. So the energy goes to the mother, so the adult, because they're a voting person, a person who votes. The child can't vote. Mother goes to the energy. The father is kind of not asked. God disappears. And the politicians say, Mother, we allow you to kill your child. We allow you to terminate the life of your child. The child doesn't want to be terminated, for sure. It rebels. But if it's old enough. But the energy, instead of saying we care about the child because of the temple of God and his new life, the state, in this cultural war, the state says the adult is more important. Adult happiness is more important than the child well-being. Yeah.
In this diagram, if the father is gone.
Well, no, he's just kicked out. He's not part of the decision.
Okay.
He's not asked. Mm-hmm. Under the law, he doesn't have to give his permission.
But okay.
The chart looks like as if the father is separated from the relationship, as in.
Yeah,
Well, as far as I understand, the law doesn't ask him. That's what I'm only making that point.
A married couple,
Well, if they're married, of course they can ask, yeah. But in general, most people who have abortions are not married. Yeah.
okay. But what I'm saying is, if they, okay.
Yeah, I'm asking about the state. The state is basically saying to the mother, we give you permission. Yeah, we give you permission. Even if your husband, even if the guy disagrees, we still give you permission.
Sorry, I got confused. Diagram was like other deaths or something.
Yeah, he's just not asked. I'm just saying he's not asked, yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter, even if he was asked. The point is the focus is on the focus is basically saying, mother, you can kill the child. You can. The well-being of the child can be undermined because of your desires. Okay? So, because of this picture here, it is, you can see this kind of how we draw it in. This is really interesting. This generates energy. Yeah? We talk about this generates the energy of existence and stuff. So, and the energy comes through the child. It's through the child out into the society and maintains the civilization and culture. Okay, so how the child is treated determines the future of the culture. How that child is treated determines the future of the culture. If it's treated badly, the culture ends up worse. Or if the child is treated better, the society ends up better. So it's really interesting that when you look at what happens around an abortion center, so if you take like these communities in America, these African American communities that they put abortion center in, and there's a high degree of abortion. Now, if abortion was centered on God, if it really didn't matter or whatever, you might say, let's get rid of all the children that are unwanted. And if we get rid of all the children who are unwanted, then all the children that are born should be wanted and loved. So the communities that are around an abortion center should be the healthiest, happiest communities. Because we've got rid of all the unwanted babies. But that's not what we find. We find the communities around an abortion clinic turn into, where there's a high number of abortions, turn into ghettos. They turn into ghettos.
So isn't that, I don't know if that makes sense logically, because it's because they are that kind of family that they have the abortion clinic, so it's not really...
No, because the African American community, when they started introducing, only had 10% out of wedlock births, and now they have 70%. Huh?
Is there evidence to say that huge increase has been caused by the introduction of...
Well, let's put it right. So I can go into it in long detail. I don't want to because it's, but yeah, I would. You see, what it. Right. Can I just talk about this? Yeah. So okay. One of the things you notice. So the child is killed with drugs, either with drugs like chemical abortion or whatever, or with metal instruments. So what tends to happen in these high abortion centers around these communities? We have lots of drug addiction and crime with murders and guns or knives or whatever, with metal instruments. And I thought, it's really interesting. You kill the child. So even if the child is not existing or technically not existing, the flow of energy that comes through this it creates this kind of outcome because the child is treated that way. So how the child is treated will show how the future of your community becomes. And that was evident in the previous, so I said, how the child is treated determines the future of your community. And suddenly I saw, oh, they're killed with that, and that's what happens in a lot of African American communities and other kind of communities with high abortion rates. So trying to figure out what happens in a certain sense is it interferes with the ability, for example, of men to be honourable. So in the past, before abortion clinic, if he made her pregnant, the families would get together and say, you have to do the honourable thing. You have to marry the girl. You have to look after the child you created. And everybody pretty much agreed, the shotgun weddings, etc. And that allowed him to take on his responsibility for his child, and often through taking on responsibility, he became more mature, more responsible. He started to earn money for his family. He became more responsible, and that whole process allowed him his socialization of the male. When we said once the abortion clinic came in, you don't have to be honourable. You can just sleep around with 20 girls, and they can all have abortions. So you don't have to be honourable at all. You don't have to grow up. You don't have to become more mature. You can take drugs and do everything you like. And you don't have that socialization process that comes with marriage. And that seems to be what happens around with this high levels of abortion, that the males don't socialize to become more responsible. And because they don't socialize to become more responsible, then what happens is that the child is unwanted. The emotion is, I don't want you, child. And then the emotion in the next generation, more and more happens of men and women increasingly, I don't want you as a woman, as my wife, and I don't want this dishonorable man to be my husband because he's just, he's not grown up, he's not responsible, And so it's kind of like they grow to unwant each other because they don't look beautiful to each other anymore. And so, that's really interesting. Similar emotion even comes through, yeah. And the very fact that this abortion clinic disturbs this honor and this relationship between the male and female gives me the belief that this is an actual truth body. This baby is a truth body because it has this power to influence the dynamics of the men and women. They treat it as a living being. It's treated as so the women have more depression and more, all kinds of other issues because of their abortions. But the males definitely get hurt by the fact that they're not socialized through marriage. They really get hurt. And so many, like 1/3 of African Americans end up in jail, in their childhood. It really has a negative effect because they are not, before they would marry and they would act responsibly and the community would expect them to do. It has a very negative effect. So we see how this caused decay. So all across the West now, we have them in England, we have large numbers of communities of single mothers. We never had this back in 60 years ago. And they're drawing enormous amount of debt is being created based upon them, and it's really affecting our debt of our nations. And we have prisons full of people and all kinds of things because of these kind of things. And this is because we violated the child, because we've the well-being, I sacrifice for my children has been lost, which was the attitude of all people up to now. Has been lost to say, you have to sacrifice yourself for me. And that changes the order of the energy of it, and your society can't exist. So the political question here is, just one human being has a right to say to another human being, whether he'd been born or not, you have to die because I say so. And there's a highly, I don't feel, when I think about it on the individual level, it doesn't resonate that a politician has a right to say that even to an unborn child. And I think there's a violation there. So we look at this, because this comes up a lot, this violation of the child. The politicians saying, you have to suffer, child, because I say so. Because politicians, one human being say, And I think, you know, the child is being violated. So we'll have a look. Okay, so we look at no-fault divorce. So the next law after abortion, which violated this natural, I sacrifice for the sake of the well-being of the children, was no-fault divorce or irretrievable breakdown. So we have this mother and father separate. The law comes in and says, I allow you to separate. I allow you to you made a promise to each other, but I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to allow one person to unbreak their promise to another person. Now, the other person might not want to keep that. They might want to keep that promise, but you made a promise to me. What on earth the law got to do with that promise? Yeah? If I make a promise to her, what on earth has the politician got to do with it? But anyway, they come in, and then they say, yeah, you can walk away. You can, if you want to, father or mother, you can walk away from your child, or you can separate your child from. So the child suffers an attachment trauma because often the father, not always, but a large number of times, the parent kind of disappears almost completely. And then that kind of creates a lack of trust in the child. We see that in all the data on self-harm and educational levels and drug taking and prison rates and you name it. Most people come from this kind of family. The child suffers. It senses I'm not loved by my two parents, and it goes into nosedive. Many of them, not all, but enough to fill our prisons and to burn a hole in our national debt. So what happens is that because so many of the children, they come out worse. They end at 18. They actually have less skills or less emotional health or less educated than their parents were at their age. In other words, it's a process of lineage decline. It's less able to manage, less able to marry, less able to stay married, less educated, maybe less wealthy, maybe less core values or more addictions or whatever. So Robert Pullman or something, one of these philosophers, somebody, can you help me out? He studied it, he traveled America, and he said, well, when I was a child growing up in America, I look at all the friends, we grew up in a poor area, and almost all the kids, they had their church community and their extended family and everything else around them, and all of us did better than our parents. All of them. And then he traveled to America a few years ago, and he went to the communities, and he said, this isn't true anymore. He says large numbers of kids are doing worse than their parents ever did. They're doing worse, and they're really doing worse. Whether it be ADHD or inability to control, or on drugs, or all kinds of. In other words, there's a decline in the quality of being human. They're less temples of God. And he said this is very noticeable because there's no community anymore. There's no church community anymore for many of them. There's no extended family around to help, and they're very lonely, and So there's the decline of family tree decline, less of a temple God. And therefore culture's going to decline because the child is less capable. So these are groups on the edge of society. We're not talking about the central core, most of whom have married parents who are doing very well in general. The only problem for them is that they get taxed a lot because of all this damage on the edge. But most of them, many of the children today have incredible lives and going off and skateboarding and ski jumping or whatever it is, and having great lives and traveling the world, but mainly that's the married core. But the edge is really growing. These groups of hurt children are in prison or in drugs. Or the numbers just keep going up. Self-harm. So you look at all the data on suicides through drug overdoses or kinds of things. They just keep going up. So a culture is in decline because this child's heart has been broken, fractured by the law. By the law. It's the legislation that comes in and says, yes, I allow you to fracture the heart of the child. I allow you to, because of your... So over 70% of the time, the child has worse outcomes. When the child, and it's not just a little bit worse, it's like they often major problems because of the divorce. In other words, people say if your parents are struggling, it's better that they divorce. No. No, that's in general, unless it's like real serious abuse or, no, because the child loses so many other things. It loses two parents' love, it loses two parents' time, it loses the ability to extend with a lot of the extended family often gets cut off and separated, and it loses loads of other good things apart from just and often the parents are still conflicted even after divorce. They're still arguing away, and so the child has worse outcomes. It's a wrong law. What you really need is a law that comes in and says, we give you 2 years of free counselling and education and marriage enrichment and trauma therapy and whatever to see if you can save your marriage, to protect the heart of the child. Because we can raise you up to a higher level. But you just don't know how to love. That's your challenge. You've got to learn how to love. And when the child is protected, the child can have that. Sometimes it just takes a few months and you can have the child happily with the rest of the parents the rest of their life, instead of attachment trauma, which may well affect their ability to marry and stay married. So divorce, the emotions often are like loneliness. The child feels lonely. The mother is extremely busy. The father's busy building his new life with his new girlfriend, probably. Often he feels lonely. There's anger, resentment, unloved. And so we see in society today, as we have now, married couples divorce, it's about 25% with children. But cohabiting parents are much higher. So we see an increase in people who feel lonely. There's a lot of anger. We see person-to-person violence keep going up. This is a very interesting one, despite other crimes going down in some ways. Unloved children, doing lots of addictions and to bury the pain of loss. So we see a lot of girls getting into alcohol. We never saw that in my, really, really drunk, in my era. It's really quite bad in some places now. So we see all kinds of, hospital wards overloaded with all kinds of problems. Okay? So the question is, has a politician, has one person a natural right to say to the child, I will allow one of your parents to walk away from you? And there's no natural right for one person to say, child, you have to suffer a worse life because I say so. I, the great politician, say you have to suffer a worse life because I say so. There's no grounding for it in natural law to say that, but they say it anyway. Yeah? Does a politician have a right to say to you, you have to suffer a worse life because I say so? Just because he's a person? Does he?
There's lots of people voicing that opinion.
What?
There's lots of people elected by people who voice that same opinion.
Yeah.
So there's a reason as well.
Yeah, but often they don't. You see, the trouble is they often don't run on these platforms of divorce. But when they run on those platforms, they don't. When they run, they say, "I'm going to introduce divorce law." They don't talk about these things in election manifestos typically. And they get introduced, and people going, what's happening? Of course, people don't understand. A lot of people don't understand what's happening, but the child, So then we get into this, because the politicians have got so used to saying, I can hurt you, child. And there's other laws between no-fault divorce and same-sex marriage, which have this same theme. I allow, because of adults' desires, we allow you to hurt, the fracture, the attachment of the child, which is the core of the whole issue, to separate you from your biological parent, one of your biological parents. And this is this fracturing which leads to this social decay. So by this time we've already used to, certain things, and the politicians say, well, we have to think about the adult feelings here. Their feelings, and they have a right to have their feelings acknowledged. But behind it all, which for some reason I never understood, they also get the right to buy children. You know, they get the right to buy children. And I go, well, excuse me, do I want to be bought as a child? Has a politician any right to say to me, you have to be sold to somebody else? I mean, we got rid of that two centuries ago, you know, in the era of slavery, you know. But here we are in this present era saying we can buy this baby from its mother's womb. Oh, the child doesn't want to be. Of course, as a baby, it doesn't know. But when it gets to 10, it starts to realize, excuse me, what happened to my mum? My friend has a mum, and I don't have a mum. And then it quickly figures out that it was bought, and then it suffers an attachment trauma, and realizes it was sold. How would you feel like if you knew it was sold? How would you feel? That someone just sold you, your mother sold you. You would feel awful. And many of these children do, but the press don't report it. But on the websites where children report these things, and increasingly so, because it's recently modern. But they say, nobody asked us. So the politicians were more interested in the adult desires than in the child heart and their attachment to their biological mother and father, which would create. So the child automatically experiences an attachment trauma. And because of that, we see in that some data, which is really scant because the universities refuse to publish it, but we see that the children have higher rates of, they enter into this world of lineage decline. In other words, if you had a community solely of same-sex parents with children, it would decay quite quickly into chaos. Unlike a heterosexual marriage, which has sustained a civilization across generations, this wouldn't survive. It wouldn't survive because there's too many traumas within the attachment of the child. It would go quite quickly into drugs and yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about, couples, man and woman, for example, you might have a situation where the woman can't have a baby.
Yeah.
And in that case, then adopting a child
Yeah.
is not seen as traumatic or as bad as you're saying,
Well, no, for sure, helping it. Sorry, yeah.
Making the jump between that and then having a homosexual relationship, they also see it as adopting a child in a way, so they see it in this similar way.
Yeah, some homosexual, some same-sex couples, yeah, they do adopt children, but the vast majority go for either IVF, where they buy the sperm of the male, or they get a friend to donate it, or whatever, or they go for surrogacy. So a lot of countries are banning surrogacy because they see it as a violation of the woman.
Most couples, male or female, they want at least one of their
Yeah.
biological parents.
Yeah.
They
That's right.
adopt it a lot less.
That's right.
And if there's a law, I guess, to do so, then...
Right. So we have here the child who knows he's been kind of bought or sold, or whatever. He knows that he's been separated from a biological parent. He suffers an attachment trauma because he knows that everybody else has his natural, or a lot of people he should have his connection to his biological parent. And he's more likely to end up on antidepressants, drugs, etc., crime. And that's what the data shows. In other words, if you, as I said, if you have a community, it would decline very quickly. It's not stable. In other words, God can't work through that. It doesn't generate the forces necessary to sustain a culture. Yeah? So, because of the child, we have to look at the child here. Yeah? And it's not just the fact that for some reason the child gets, the state allows them to buy children, which, as I said, 2 centuries ago, I thought we gave up on that. But so has a politician a natural right to say to the child, I allow people to buy and sell you? There's no natural right there.
I don't think they're claiming one, so I don't know.
Well, they do, because they say you can go off and buy one.
That's not based on natural rights.
Well, I'm just saying, we gave up, we agreed that buying people and selling them a long time ago was not a healthy way to build a community.
How people being bought and sold.
Because they pay for the child out of its mother's womb.
As far as it's
Yeah. So it's paid for.
not bought,
It's bought.
by law, you're only allowed to cover the cost of the surrogate.
No. There's a surrogacy clinic companies or whatever. They charge up to 40,000. I understand.
In English law, it's against the law.
Yeah, okay, within England, yeah, but a lot of people get surrogacy from abroad or kinds of other things, yeah? And they do that because they can't find somebody to have their own child in their own country, yeah? So when you read the data on this, we have anyway, I don't want to go there. But the point is, we do have large companies now that offer for you can get your child from the mother's womb for about 40,000. The mother gets about 10 and the company gets 30. Okay, so there's a high profit motive there. And people pay it. Yeah? So it's not just the fact that the child is, but you see, when you introduce this same thing, there's other people that get hurt. I'm just saying there's other people, you can't just focus on those people's rights. You have to look at who gets hurt. Who gets hurt in this? So one of the other groups of people that gets hurt is another group of children, which is children in school. So for some reason, I don't know why, because if I thought, okay, same-sex, you want to teach same-sex, right? You teach it to children who want to know same-sex relationships. So if you've got 2% of kids who might have, tendency, okay, I teach it to 2%, and the other 98% who don't really want to know about it in some sense, that they want to get on with their heterosexual lives, and they just want to get on with that, and because it's the healthiest thing for them, they don't need this other stuff. But the state forces it upon them and says, you have to learn this stuff. Okay? And can you imagine doing that to adults? Can you imagine in a company training or whatever, you have to sit down and you have to watch gay sex because part of your company training? We would all violate. We would all feel utterly, We would feel utterly violated. As adults, we would feel violated. But the state says we can do it to children because they can't complain. Because they can't complain, just like they can't complain about being bought and sold, can't complain about being killed, can't complain that they're separated from their parents. They can't complain that they are being taught this stuff, which they don't want to be taught, many of them. So what happens then is that, because you look at the data, it's from the American data on children who get involved in same-sex sexual, some experiment, some try it out, and the data on these same sexes, there's more partner rape, there's more partner violence, there's more depression, there's more drugs, and children experiment with this lifestyle. They experiment with it because they think, oh, well, I'm going to be cool, I'm going to show how cool I am, and they experiment, they get involved and sucked into a world which they wouldn't have got sucked in if they hadn't been taught about it. So the data from Canada is very clear that the number of children experiencing this, and America, this recent study of thousands of kids in America shows that more children get sucked into that as it's taught in schools. And the data on it, they have more problems, diseases and everything else. So by forcing it on all children who would never actually want to by themselves go and study it, by forcing it, and we know if a company came along and says part of our LGBT training, you have to learn about gays, we would utterly rebel. But the kids can't rebel. And the parents can rebel and then they're told they're bigots. And it's utterly rubbish. It's garbage. The child has a right to their own sexuality and it doesn't have to be forced to be taught something else. So children suffer even worse outcomes because the government got involved with its lawmaking. Nothing to do with the gays. It's the laws that are made. And it's the wrong laws which hurt the children. Okay, and then, so can a politician have a natural right to the child? I will force you to study same-sex sexualities just because, and you can't say no. Because that's what schools are saying now. I will force you to study this stuff and you can't say no. Does a person have a natural right to say, you have to study this and you can't say no? Of course they don't. But they still do it anyway. And beyond that, as kids are told that the law can do this, and the religion's saying, no, it's not a good idea, then they're told their religions are bigoted, but they're not. The religions are concerned about the well-being of the children. They're concerned about their children being protected. But the media and the law says, no, you're bigoted. So the children grow up saying, oh, my religious parents are bigoted. No, we don't like the law, which makes the children have worse outcomes. That's the problem. The law shouldn't be involved. And we don't want that. So religious community decline. The children walk away from their faith. And that's what happens. And then, as William explained the other day, but once you redefine marriage to mean this is the place where the state validates adult desires, it redefines it. It means there's something different than it's always meant, which is this is the place where we look after the well-being of children. And if you're a heterosexual who creates biological children, you need to know this is the place where you look after the biological children because they want to know the love of their two parents. Yeah? So that's what marriage means. It's the place where you validate the heart of the child to know the love of two parents. But the state says, no, it's not. It's a place where adult desires are happiness. So we see in all the countries which introduce same-sex marriage, less heterosexuals marrying now. Because they say, well, it's not about the children anyway. It's all about adults. And I already have the adult desires. But no, it's always been, look, you got pregnant, get married to protect the child. It's to protect the child. That's what it's always been, the biological child. So more children end up in cohabiting, and fragile cohabiting is like 80% separation with children. So more children end up with the attachment bond, and more children end up self-harming and all kinds of things. So, does the politician have a natural right to say 98% of heterosexuals, you have no right to a word that specifically focuses on men and women bonding so as to protect the well-being of their biological child? You have no right, 98% of you, no right to this word, marriage, which means if you're going to have kids, get married because the heart of the child needs both of you. And they have no right to say that. No politician has the right to say 98% of population, you have no right to a word. But that's what they've done. They've overstepped their power. So what happens, how you treat the child, again, determines the future. So as we move into a child being bought and sold as a possession, we increasingly become seen as products as human beings. So we've seen the rise of euthanasia. The buying of death, for example. Yeah. And now we're starting to see the buying of sexual modification of the body. And I imagine in about 10 years' time, you will get human beings who say, I want a vagina and a penis at the same time, please. And that's where we're going right now with this body modification.
Not necessarily.
Huh?
Not necessarily. I don't know any transgender person that wants to.
I'm saying that's where they're going. That's where they're going. Because there's a lot of profit in it.
I understand that, but that requires the individual to want both of those things.
I catch that, but the point is, but all I'm saying is we're going to a very strange place, okay? Okay, go.
You overstepped.
Okay. I'm just saying we've become more and more of a consumer society when it comes to human life, that's all, okay? Okay, so anyway, quickly moving on. So this is different because it's slightly different because this is first blessing and this transgender issue. Okay, so in transgender issue, basically the body of the person disappears. So there's no longer any you can't, based upon their body, you can't give a person their gender. Yeah. So it's just so you end up with nothing to give and take with. There's nothing there fundamentally to give and take with. And because of that, if you talk about what happens to future society, it dies very quickly. That's what it means. If you go this way, you will really die very quickly. But because they are saying, because if you understand the life of a transsexual, if you study the data, it's appallingly, for many of them, it's an appalling life. It's very lonely. Many of them can't build any kind of relationship. They can't have children. Many of them are depressed and can't hold a job. Many have health problems because they have constant health problems because they had these and it's a very depressing life for many of them. And many of them commit suicide. They have 20% higher because they can't create a family and they can't get a job, many of them, and they can't. And it's a miserable, miserable life. And here we are saying, oh, let's transition these children, they'll be happy. No, it's a miserable life. It's a fruitless life. Not fruitful. It's a fruitless. Okay. Now, because this violates the principle of mind and body unity, whenever transgender people, this law-making, the law, it's always the law, it's nothing to do with the people. When politicians make laws connected with the theory, the transgender, it destroys whatever it touches because it doesn't have the energy, it's a destructive energy, it doesn't have any energy to it. Destroys it. So it says, oh, men can run against women. Well, that destroys women's sports. Yeah. If you listen to the people who are studying biological sciences, they say the biological science are being ruined very quickly. A lot of research is not being published anymore because it violates this transgender theory. We've already seen that in sociology department where they said marriage is not important to society, and they destroyed the sociology departments because of it. Now they're going to destroy this one. We see girl guides, people leaving the girls leaving the girl guides because boys can go on it, and we see all kinds of everything it touches, it destroys. There isn't anything it can bond with naturally and feel at home with because it's not made of any kind of energy that we recognize as good. So it's highly problematic, this. When you make laws based upon this, it's the law. Yeah.
How, I'm just saying, if you said trans people lead a less fruitful life, or
If they have transsexuals, I'm talking about transsexuals.
Yeah, transsexual people. Is that
after the section? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Right. Because they don't. They're sterile. They can't have children. Nobody really wants a long-term relationship with them, and as I said, they have health problems and hard to keep a job because of their health problems.
Yeah, if they make a law,
Yeah.
make it easier for them.
But if you've lost your ability to have a family and you've lost it, you can't make a law to fix that, you see. And if you have ongoing health problems, you can't make a law to fix that, and you can't fix that. Yeah, if you're lonely because of that. Yeah. So when you look at the data, when you look really hard in the data on these children who are in schools, who are declaring, because it's entered the schools, and you can be transgender, yeah. We find a whole range of different groups of children misdiagnosing their psychological illness as being transgender. So in the Tavistock Institute in England, which is the main institute for children, 35% of the children who say they are transgender are autistic children. They're suffering from autism. And autistic children find it really hard to socialize with people of their own gender. They feel like they can't read the signals. So many of these children find it easier to relate with the opposite sex. The boys find it hard to relate with the boys because they feel like teased. So they go off and the girls kind of like have compassion on them and say, yeah, we'll take care of you. And so they misreading, they think, I must be a girl because I get on better with girls. And it's the same the other way around. So 35% of the children that get to the Tavistock Institute for sex are autistic. A large percentage are raped children. They were raped. And they've come to the conclusion, either a boy and a girl, either or, that if I was the opposite sex, I would never be raped again. So they misdiagnose, they haven't thought through what they're doing. There's a lot of children with psychological disturbed parents, and there's a lot of children who didn't have both parents, so they're taking longer, they're just taking longer than the average child to understand what their natural gender is, because it's confused, because they didn't see what it means to be a male. They haven't seen it. They don't catch it. They only understand the male, female, and the male, there's a boy, and he's just only seen his mother at work, and he's trying to understand what it means to be a male. So in the data, all these groups, and now we're getting rapid onset groups of girls who are just declaring all together, we're all transgender because we're cool. But nobody tells them about the miserable life of being a transsexual. Nobody tells them how terrible it is. They make it sound so cool. And if they knew the miserable life, they would never declare that. But nobody's telling them. Schools refuse to tell them. So the studies we have was about 20 studies or so, which studied the children who were like confused gender. They misdiagnosed it and thought, maybe I'm the opposite gender. They had a psychological struggle, whatever it be, raped or autism or whatever. And they were young and they got confused. By the time they got to puberty, the studies showed that like 90%, 80 to 90% stopped being confused. They were clear that they weren't the opposite gender. If they were just left alone. They were just misdiagnosing their own trauma. Problems. So they stopped and they found the real cause for their problem as they matured. So this is what all the data coming in as. Yeah? But we're told that these children aren't allowed to have counselling now.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
data is not available anymore. It used to be. Yeah.
What? No, this data is fully available.
It's available.
Yeah, so you can study, you can storage all the studies, yeah. So now the law says, no, you can't, because the fact that they've declared they are the opposite gender, it must be absolutely true, and therefore to try to counsel them means to kind of, how one say, what's the word, conversion therapy. No, they're misdiagnosing their psychological struggle because they were hurt as children. And they think maybe, or they have autism, or whatever, they think because they get on better with the other sex, or they're running away from being raped again, or they didn't have a father, so they don't know what it means to be a man, so maybe it's easier to be a woman. They're just misdiagnosing their own psychological problem. And if they're left alone, they figure it out. But we now refuse to counsel them, and we refuse to leave them alone. We're now saying you have to be rushed off to have your sex change operation and the miserable life that follows. That's what we're doing. Okay? So in 2018, 2,000 children were sent. Some of them as young as 8, 7, were sent off to the Tavistock Institute. 1,000 were declined because they were so mentally unstable already. It was highly noticeable that they were really like, whoa. And the other 1,000 are on puberty blockers and sterilization and everything else. And quite a few staff have quit from the Tavistock Institute saying these children, many of them are still very mentally unstable and they're being pushed into this. And that was in the Times last week. They said, this is wrong. Okay? Because they're just misdiagnosing their own problem and no one's talking to them to help them find out why they're misdiagnosing, what the underlying problem is. They're not members of the opposite sex. They're just people who are confused because of their previous life history. Okay? But when you know this research, you can see it's another case of harming children to fulfill adult desires. The adults have an ideological push that says they must be born in the body of the wrong sex. No. These children, when you look at the data, are traumatized kids who didn't get the right start in life. So they're the most vulnerable children in society, and here we are, so you get in the data now, you get mothers who are saying, I've got a child who's autistic, and they just said she's a girl, she's a boy. And I know she's autistic, I know she's it before, she's never ever shown any signs of being a boy. But because of what she's read online and somebody's told her, she says, I'm a boy. With it. I just think she's been misled because she's autistic, And now the social workers are coming in and saying, well, if you don't agree with her, we'll take your child away with you. So we have to agree that she'll go off to have her puberty blockers and her breast removed and everything else. All the while, as a parent, your child is just an autistic child that's confused. And these heartbreaking, and then after all the operations, they're dumped back with their parents, and the parents then have to deal with it. This child who is already psychologically hurt now has this body destroyed. And then they go off and they live on the streets, many of them, and they scrounge by and the politicians are happily living with their own families. Yes?
Sorry, I don't really understand what you mean by the sense of to have puberty blockers.
Well, because the state now in several countries, now says you have to fully agree with your child's assessment, and we're not going to offer the child counselling. So self-misdiagnosis, you have to agree to that, and otherwise we will take the child away from you. Yeah. So the parent has to just sign the papers or lose the child. Yeah. Technically. The child goes off and gets her breast removed and all these puberty blockers and everything else huh? Girls they're going down age 9 now to 10 to puberty blockers. Yeah. To stop and for boys too, and that will stop them growing as high and change their voice. Yeah. But so they don't grow as tall, and their voices change and everything else. Okay. But they can't do cross-sex hormones until they're 16 because they need the penis to grow so that it can be made into a vagina. But the puberty blockers they can. And nobody knows the effects of these puberty blockers. It's just like experimentation on the Second World War, just giving drugs to people and say, whoa, let's see what happens. But all the science transsexuals is that these cause cancers, they cause blood problems and clots and all kinds of physical problems. So you're giving these drugs to kids who don't know anything about what they're doing. They have no idea what they signed up to. Sterility, a life on drugs which will hurt them and harm them. They have no idea what they're signing. We know it as adults. We know as adults they will grow out of it, most of them. We know what the life of a transsexual is like, and we know these drugs, and we're just without any counselling now. So Planned Parenthood in America, Planned Parenthood now is now kind of with its own policies, saying you can just pretty much the child walk into their clinics and they'll put you on drugs without parental consent.
It's shocking. Being 9 years old is like primary school age.
Yeah, that's right.
Then they treat her like an adult.
Well, they shouldn't do because they're too young to make the decision. They can't make, technically we agree children don't, at least until 18, they can't make these kind of decisions, but we do it anyway.
In America?
Hey, here, and Australia, and all over the place. So.
2 years
waiting list now.
Waiting list in England to get the treatment
Yeah.
in transgender clinic.
But a lot of, right. So basically, the energy has moved. So has the politician a natural right to say to the child, because they're passing laws like this now, you have no right to have counselling so you can find out the root cause of your gender confusion so you can stop misdiagnosing your gender confusion. I tell you, you're gender confused, but you have no right to counsel to find out the root cause of that, because I'm a politician. No, there's no natural right to say that, but they do it anyway. Yeah. You must go and have destroying operation instead, which was destroy your life. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what we have in today's world, we have a cultural war. Okay, on one side of the society, the people can see the hurting children. They can see all the hurt being done to children. They can see the fact that about 30% of children today grow up in a single-parent home. Yeah. Kids in divorce. So about 15% of children are now children to single parents only, the purposeful single parenting. We have same-sex marriage kids, maybe 1%. We have divorce after cohabitation, we have about 8%. So we have like over 50% of the children today now have a separation trauma. And our prisons are full, our drug problems are going out of control, our STD problem is going out of control, we almost have no drugs left to fix it. Our national debt dealing with all these problems is spiraling out of control. It's massive and it won't stop growing because it's unnatural what we're doing to hurt children for the sake of adult desires. Now, some people say you can't build a better world by hurting so many children, and they're absolutely right. And some people say media now and the education system, that's hate speech to adults. So basically, when you talk about saying we're promoting LGBT rights in schools, you're saying their right to for example, to separate a child from its biological parents. That's what you're teaching. Adults have a right to hurt children. That's what you're teaching. So anybody who says this is wrong is told they're hurting adults. So the whole of the culture war is those who see the damage done to children, those who see the national debts, the prisons, all the problems involved. The homelessness is growing, just growing, because so many kids come from broken homes and they just walk out, you know. And it's an ongoing problem, and the root cause is the fact that the state keeps passing the laws that say you adults are allowed to, for your desires, you can hurt children. It's the wrong energy, it's the wrong way around. Parents sacrifice for the child. That's what the principle, that's how we got here, Christian teaching. And it's the wrong way around. And the problem is you can't say that anymore. You can't say this anymore. It's getting harder and harder to say this. And this is really worrying, that you can't say, I'm sorry, I really don't agree that you can separate a child from its biological parent. In whatever way that happens. Yeah. So, and kids are leaving the religion which teaches them you should sacrifice for your children, and they're joining the religion which says you can sacrifice children for the adults. That's what's happening. And we're dooming our cultures to decay. So, you know, it's okay, so that's what they're teaching. It's okay for adults to hurt children, the attachment trauma of children, that's okay to hurt it, even though it devastates the child's life. And by being tolerant of this, we will build better society. And if you do agree with this, you're a nasty, intolerant person. And that's where we're at. And so the Christian religion says it's not okay to sacrifice a child of God for the sake of adults' desire. Is now taught as hate speech. Yeah? And those who teach it's okay to sacrifice the attachment bond of a child and destroy it is a healthier way to go. And that's where we're at in society today. And it's problematic, yeah. So we have this biblical view, which my wife and I, we try to grow our best ability, and we try to give our best. It wasn't our absolute best, but we tried the best in some sense, to try to give our children the best we could give them. so that they could have be better people than we are. And we were willing to sacrifice whatever we had to sacrifice to do that. Sometimes we were sacrificing our own happiness because it was just really hard to keep going sometimes. But we did it because we knew the children would suffer if we walked away from each other. They would have far worse lives. Okay? And therefore we didn't do it. And we got through it. And now I love her so much. And I'm so glad we stayed together. And most marriages can say the same if they stay together, I think. And the children are happier because we're still together. For sure. And that's the religious tradition of the unificationism, and that's what the Christian tradition teaches, and that's why we built Europe. And as soon as we lose it, where we say you can sacrifice a child for adult happiness, it reverses an order of creation. It's not how God comes down. And you end up with a dead civilization. And the Muslims come in, and they're teaching you sacrifice for the sake of the child. That's what they teach when they come in. Okay? Yes, good.
What about Karl Marx?
Huh?
What about Karl Marx?
What about Karl Marx?
Because it's Marxism, cultural Marxism.
What about Karl Marx? Okay, good question. Now, how does Marxism link in with this, you see? So Marx is a very interesting guy, but when you look at the theory of, you see, he introduced what I call a quick fix to solve social problems. Okay? So he said, look, I tell you what, you guys, you know, we've got these poor people over here, and we got these rich guys, and the rich guys are the nasty guys, and the poor guys are suffering. So let's solve this problem very quickly. Okay? And what we'll do is we'll take away some of the natural rights of the owners. We'll take away their right of ownership and the right of property and keep their wages or whatever. And we'll take away that and we'll give it to the poor, and that way everybody will be wealthier. And what happened? No, people didn't get wealthier because you killed off the people who made the wealth. That's what you did. And society didn't go anywhere. In the West, we carried on with our process of lineage development. So we were poor. We had these great big slums in the 1850s, massive slums in London. But by 1950, a lot of these slums had gone because of the process of lineage improvement. By step, the children being better educated, so people became wealthier. So in 1950s and 60s, everybody in the suburbs got their houses, and more people got their, and so the wealth of the West grew, and because it followed the process of lineage improvement. And in Marx, they said, no, let's quickly introduce a law. Let's take away the rights of the rich, and let's spread the money around. And then that didn't help anything. It didn't improve the quality of human beings, so that they are better capable to make money for themselves. It just gave them some more money, a bit, but nothing much, and because they didn't really grow, and the government said, we solved the problem, so you don't have to grow anymore. They didn't grow. So Marxism is try to implement a quick fix to solve the problem, but it doesn't solve it. It's a political intervention to solve a sociological problem, which can only be solved through lineage improvement. So we have a problem here on all these issues. How do you solve unwanted babies? So the Marxist idea is, let's kill them, and then they're gone. But all that does is create decay, exactly what happened within Russia. So what's the natural process? You raise your children like we try to do, so that they try not to get involved in early sexuality and have babies to kill. We try to teach our children, try to not go there until you get married. Yeah? So we go the natural way. We will reduce unwanted parents by raising the children to be better unwanted children, by raising the children to be a higher standard of God, God's temple. That's the natural way to reduce. It takes time. It takes 1 or 2 or 3 generations maybe, but that's the natural way to solve the problem. But they introduced a quick fix, they killed the babies, but all you did was create massive people in decay, massive communities of decay. So Marxism is always about trying to implement a quick fix which take away some natural rights, and taking away the natural rights leads to decay. So this is as I said, the politicians are saying all kinds of things here which are not natural. They don't have that natural power to say you have to die because I say so. You don't have to say right to say you can't have counselling because I don't say you can't have it. But they're taking away the human rights of people, and all they're doing is creating decay because the child can't get the counselling it needs to solve the problem. So instead we get decay. You get kids having operations because the politicians are being Marxist in their intervention. You can't have your natural right to counselling. And all that happens is the society decays. So it's a political intervention which interferes with natural development. It's a political intervention rather than trying to develop people to a higher standard of. The only way to solve social problems is fundamentally through raising human beings to a higher level of divinity. That's what it comes down to. And whenever the government tries to solve that, like for example, no-fault divorce, rather than raise people up so they are able to build better marriages so that they don't have to go through the divorce, the government says, okay, let's quick fix it. You're struggling, separate you, hurt the child, destroy your society, that's it. And so people today find it incredibly hard to marry and stay married. Much harder than my era, because of all the confusion that's going on.
It also seems like the community
Huh?
plays a big role. It also seems like the community plays a big role.
Yeah, community, yeah. And so that's a quick fix. So the no-fault divorce is a quick fix of the Marxian kind. It interferes with saying, how do we raise people up to a higher standard of living so they're more able to marry and stay married? It's all about introducing political quick fix rather than developmental, educational, counselling, you name it.
Also, when you were talking about the ADHD
Yeah.
counselling and
Yeah,
stuff like that, I actually have a transgender housemate
yeah,
who, for example, is exactly the same situation
yeah,
where he isn't able to socialise with guys so well
right,
and what time with girls.
right.
Started thinking they also being more accepted by them.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
And it does have like all the time as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
actually-
They just find it easier to relate with the opposite sex. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a tragedy, and that's. So all this stuff about I'm born in the wrong body, these children are not like that. These children have psychological issues, most of them, and they're really struggling.
Transgenerational trauma.
Yeah, they might have transgenerational traumas from one generation. Okay. So do you understand why it's called cultural Marxism? Because it's this political intervention to try to solve a problem.
I understood your understanding of Karl Marx.
Good, thank you. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? I know your time is late. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. But as I said, when I started this journey, I was on the side of marriage even though I know the principle and I've studied it for years and taught marriage, I was on the side, and I didn't catch the damage done to the children. I didn't see that. And here we are saying, yes, it's okay to create that attachment problem with children, and we can't do that. We're not allowed to. Can't say to a child, you have no right to be with both biological parents. That's it. Okay? So thank you so much for being patient with my overtime and everything else. I hoped it helped you understand something. Do you think it helped you at all? No?
What will William say tomorrow?
Too tough. Hmm. Yeah. We're really caught because this child wants to know the love of both parents, and that's what it's built upon, everything, our societies. And we break that and we crumble.
What do you think about our tradition of gift children?
What? Give children. I struggle with it. Yeah, I do struggle with it.
Like you give a child.
What?
Well, all
I-
the traumas can be solved when they are integrated.
Okay.
So when you actually acknowledge this, and it's not hidden, the child can be healed.
Yeah.
But if the law doesn't allow that,
Yeah.
then it's difficult.
Yeah. I think if the couples are really good friends and they're close by each other, I can kind of cope with that. But I always see that whenever we allow one thing, it's like this euthanasia. You know, like, oh, we allow it only for this kind of, we allow euthanasia only for that. And next year, well, actually we'll include that. And next year, oh, we'll include that. And next year, because there's a profit motive. And whenever we do these things for profit, then the people like just start to go haywire. And so in Holland this year, got 10,000 people, euthanized, and all kinds of mental illness and psychological people. It's just growing really crazy there, and I just don't think. So I really question anything that. So I talked to you yesterday, William, about abortion. Yeah, you shared about your abortion. Yeah, and my analysis, when I talk to people and I read the stuff, they say if there's a problem with the mother possibly dying because the baby's in the wrong place, like so halfway up the tube instead of in the uterus or whatever, they can correct that through surgery now. So they say there's absolutely no reason to abort any child at all because we can medically pretty much correct all things. Yeah. So I don't know if that's true or not.
I'm just saying that you had some. I think it's more the abuse of anything that makes it bad. Like this should be allowed, but the abuse of them is just causing the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem because once you allow that, but once we open the slippery slope, we typically go down abusing it more and more, and that we always do that as human beings, and that's the problem. And we don't ever stop.
But there is one point.
You know.
Principle, the responsibility.
Yeah.
If there is a portion of responsibility that should be respected, as long as the people involved can take that responsibility. Because it's also the father is responsible and the mother. Equally.
Okay. That if it's in the wrong position and the mother and it can't be corrected.
Well, I don't know. A lot of them can be. A lot of these. The point is that in the past we couldn't solve a lot of these problems because of operators. I'm just saying. I want to say, having studied a lot of this stuff, I see that every time we get involved with some kind of technological intervention into natural processes, the society weakens the generation after. It causes more problems than it. So every time we introduce this, whatever we introduce, whether these operations or these drugs or whatever else, and it interferes with natural laws, and we just suffer from them. And I think all of us can imagine a time when, if we carry on down with this genetic modification process and this IVF and this genetic modification, that we could end up in serious problems because we're making some serious errors in this genetic modification process. And I believe that creates far more possible damage for future generations than benefits. So I just see warning signs every time we get involved with this stuff. And I think if we stay as natural as we can be, and God looked after us for generations, and I think when it comes to this sexual issue, we should stay out of it. So anyway, that's my personal opinion. Okay? So thank you. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. Okay?
Just